To sum everything up, I think the Reason 13 update is amazing. I still can't recommend it to people, and I think Reason Studios should change their business model. Hey, I'm back. Unfortunately, making videos about music production has taken a back seat recently because I've been working on my other project, which is a guitar education website. So if you enjoy guitar or want to learn guitar, feel free to check that out. Reason 13 has just come out. The Reason 13 update is great, but I'm concerned about their ability to compete in the future. So, in order to unpack what I mean by all of that, the rest of this video will be divided into 3 parts. Part 1, what's great about Reason 13? What do I like about this update? Because I think it's actually an excellent update. Part 2, problems I have with Reason 13 and why I struggle to recommend Reason to certain people. And part 3, how I think Reason should change their business model in order to stay competitive in the future. Let's get into it. Part 1, what's great about Reason 13? When I first saw this new in 13 page, I was pretty nervous, I'm not gonna lie. They were making a big deal about a browser, which was something that they'd made a big deal about in 12. Sequencer upgrades, this polytone idea. Ripley space delay though, this looked amazing. Reason tools, in my mind those were 3 very boring utilities. When I looked at this, all I saw that interested me was the space delay. And so I was a little bit nervous, but I'm pleased to say, I think this update is fantastic. I think every one of the things that Reason has released in terms of tools is awesome.
Here's what I love about Polytone and why we're diving in like this instead of me making a walkthrough video where I teach you the front panel knob by knob. Polytone is really simple to understand. The controls are all here on the front panel, so you just dial them in to get your sound.
I want to highlight a couple of the features that really captured my attention when I played with it. First of all, this age knob. When you turn it, it changes the age of the synth. So there's more pitch drift and stuff. If I set the age to 2024 and play this track back, pitch and everything is like what you would expect. If I turn it to 1970, all of a sudden there's a ton more pitch drift and I think it's awesome. I wonder though if Reason Studios will continue to update the age. So next year, are they gonna add 2025? Because that would be a fun little Easter egg. The other thing that I really love about Polytone is the fact that you have these 2 panels and you can change between them. So right now it's set on layer mode mix. If I play it back and mix between them, we can see the different vibes that I'm getting from each of these panels. This is where it gets exciting though. If you hit morph, rather than mixing them together, it actually morphs between the settings on all of the knobs, as opposed to mix.
That's the thing about Ripley. It's a series of simple little effects that add up to one big cool one. Understanding how each piece works, how they relate to each other, and how they can be routed will have you reaching for Ripley whenever you need to spice up sounds or completely transform them. Ripley is one of those devices that I am super excited by because I know that I've only barely begun to explore what I can do with it. There is complexity and depth that will be challenging me to push further with that for a while.
Rather than me doing a walkthrough, check out Ryan's video because it's great. I found I was really enjoying a lot of the special effects. This one in particular, Glitch Generator, I think gives some awesome kind of vibe to this synth sound. Have a listen. Without Ripley, with Ripley, so you can get these crazy creative sounds. One of the things I'm most excited about this delay plugin is using it as a delay for guitar. These 2 together. And one of the reasons why I think this works so well on guitars, and well, just in general, actually, over here, this space allows you to put the reverb, which is the space sound, and the delay in either parallel or series. You know, I think I might do another video going into why I like Ripley for guitar sounds. But aside from the fact that everything works together to create really, really awesome delay sounds, the two specific things I think that I like the most about Ripley are the fact that you can run the delay and reverb in parallel, and the fact that it's got a ducker. I find it an inspiring plugin to play with.
I also know that in 1 year's time, the devices that will have ended up in my own Reason rack more than any of the other new stuff in Reason 13 are the 3 utility tools: sidechain tool, stereo tool, and gain tool. How do I know that? Because I'm constantly doing those 3 things in my production and my mixing. I'm constantly getting that pumping sidechain sound. I'm constantly widening my stereo field. And I am constantly boosting or attenuating the volume of my combinators on my mastering insert chain to help me control the gain.
So I said that I was a little apprehensive about the Reason tools at first because they're just basic utilities, right? But this is where I have been very impressed by Reason Studio's execution of these ideas. So the gain tool, yeah, it does look like it's just got basically the same things that the Ableton tool has, what you'd expect in a basic gain tool. But it's got so much more than that. You can change the mode here to control gain between your main and an aux channel. You can switch it to a crossfade mode, again between the main and an aux channel. And then on this side, you can control with pan, or you can have dual pan, or there is a router where you can go between main or a split signal. And then you've got your inverting right and left and swapping and that kind of thing. It's way more functional than the Ableton one. The stereo tool, it's fine. I mean, this is probably the most underwhelming of the 3 for me, simply because if you've used Wider before, which is a free plugin, it looks like it's basically the same thing. You can increase the stereo field. There is a low bypass. You can switch it to mono or not mono. This is Reason's stereo tool on full. Wider. This is not the most scientific of tests. If you are not wanting to upgrade to Reason 13, but you still want to play with stereo widening, and you haven't used Wider, which is free, check it out. But yeah, stereo tool does a great job. And then we have the sidechain tool, which is awesome. I really like it. I used to use synchronous all the time as a sidechain tool, but this is way better. This is great. It's got an auto pump feature, which is very, very customizable. It's got a trigger, which I haven't messed around with too much, but can be triggered via audio or MIDI. And then it's got just good old regular sidechain mode. We've also updated the browser. It's great. It's what it probably should have been last year when Reason 12 came out. I found it works really, really well to shift between sounds that you're trying to test on an instrument. I found it really quick to shift through sounds. I used to get annoyed with the old Reason browser because it felt like a hassle trying to audition sounds. This feels quicker to me. I don't like that it doesn't just give you a preview of what the sound sounds like if you scroll through. But I understand why they have chosen not to do that, which is if you have a sound play when you select it, it might influence your choice of how you think you should use that sound. Whereas if it just, plays when you input some notes, it's kind of your ideas initially that are prompting you to think about how you might use that sound. I think that's a fair enough reason. It's not my preference when it comes to using a browser, but I think that's a completely justifiable reason for not having them automatically be previewed unless you play something. And if you just go cancel, it just reverts back to what you had, which is great. So yeah, I mean, nothing incredibly groundbreaking about the browser. It's kind of just the same as what we would expect from any decent browser these days. Like Ableton is quite similar. See, Ableton has the previews. You can turn that off, but if you want them, it's there. And then they did a sequencer upgrade, which if we pop over here to standalone Reason, you can see if I click on the MIDI, there is now the tools over here. Now, this is not exceptionally groundbreaking. All they did was take the tool window that was hidden away somewhere. I don't even remember how to access it because I've been out of standalone for a while, and put it here, which is like, it's good. I think it's a big improvement because they're far more accessible. They've also redesigned it a little bit, and then if you click the browser, that pops up and is floating, which I think is a really good way to do it. I was a little bit less into this whole idea of a floating browser initially, but after playing with it for a bit, I really like the floating browser. In standalone, I don't like the floating browser here. It's kind of annoying. I wish it would get out of the way and not stay confined to the plugin. To me, that just defeats the entire point of a floating browser. I would much rather have it either float out of the window or pop up the same way that the devices do, so it's not in the way of my rack, seeing that in the plugin you're kind of limited for space. So that's all the new stuff in Reason 13, and I think it's fantastic. I really like all of the effects. I think the tools have been done really, really well. I think the changes they've made to the sequencer in Reason 13 in the browser make sense. I don't think those things have anything really groundbreaking about them, but it makes sense and it's a good update. Reason 13 is a very, very solid update. If you have been like on the fence about upgrading for the last version or two, it totally makes sense to do it now. Which brings us into the second part of this video, problems I have with Reason and why I struggle to recommend it to certain people. I started testing Reason 13 in Reason Standalone and pretty quickly got frustrated with the workflow limitations, and I switched back to Ableton. None of these issues are big deals in and of themselves, but as they combine and stack on top of each other, I found that they create more friction in regards to the user experience that I didn't want. It's funny because I feel like Reason's plugins and effects in the rack are usually so well thought out and intuitive and easy to use, and I really, really like them. Standalone feels the opposite of that. I keep running into tiny little things that aren't big deals, but just feel not very well thought out. Obviously, the big caveat here is that not everybody is going to be bothered by the things that I'm finding frustrating. A lot of people really love Reason Standalone and don't have any issues with it. So if that's you, great. Skip this part of the video. Here's just a few little things that I don't love about Reason Standalone that I think if they changed would make it way better. Oh, one of the things actually that they added in terms of the sequencer, which I forgot to mention, is this whole situation which Ableton has had forever, but it's in Reason now, which is really, really cool. One problem that exists now as a result of that, I think, is the zone that you have to click in now for your cursor is really small. You have to click just there, not here, not here. Literally just this tiny little zone. I don't know why every DAW doesn't do this. It's not just Reason. But Ableton, you can literally click wherever you like. Another thing that I found kind of strange, given that they've just made a big deal about adding this tool menu over here, is if you want to reverse notes or scale the tempo, you have to right click on the thing and it's in a menu over here. Then there's note tools and stuff, and that's kind of what was supposed to be over here. To me, that would have seemed to have been the perfect opportunity to put it here in the new tool mode. Reason I don't think works well at all in a single monitor setup, and I think it's even worse now. Another thing that they added in terms of their sequencer updates, which I forgot to mention before, you can now have the piano roll and the arranger view open at the same time, which is great. However, now we've got like potentially 4 kind of windows that we can have open at the same time that are all stacked on top of each other vertically. And I found sometimes it can be a little bit hard to find and like grab each one. To me, this just seems like there's a ton of dead space here and here. Yes, you can use kind of the shortcut keys to move around on your keyboard, which is definitely helpful. But I just found myself getting kind of frustrated trying to navigate between all of this stuff in a single monitor setup. Having said that, I think if you have Reason with multiple monitors, it is a very, very fun way to work. You can have like a dedicated one for the rack and the sequencer and maybe the mixer. I don't think it really works well as a single monitor setup. Like I said earlier in the video, I think it's great that they moved this tool window here. I think it is a very good update for Reason in regards to what it was. But they just moved the tool menu. It wasn't anything particularly new. The reason this kind of like stands out to me is because Ableton, in their most recent update, completely revamped the tool menu and added a ton of really creative MIDI features and MIDI tools to the tool menu. So now we have Reason kind of playing catch up and doing something that's like good, makes sense for Reason, but it's not new. It's not even close to what you can do in Ableton, which has a similar type of setup. This kind of makes me think about this idea that I've had for a while now, which is it seems that whenever Reason adds a new workflow feature, it's always like just done to the bare minimum so they can say they have it. I don't feel like they give a lot of thought to user experience. And I've felt this way since they released crossfades. So if I want to crossfade this in Reason, I can do that. But once I do that, all I can do is this. There's no up or down. It's just that. Whereas, you know, you compare that to Ableton, you can kind of move this around anywhere. It's like, yeah, in Reason, it does the job, but it doesn't do it as well as it could have. Like, how hard would it be to add up and down as well as the x-axis? Or in Reason 12, they made a really big deal about how they had updated the browser. That was like one of the announcements for the update. And it was like better, but like barely. And so Reason 13, they've made a big deal about improving the browser. And this time I think it's finally justified. It's actually better. But like, the browser shouldn't be the big announcement 2 updates in a row. Like, why didn't we just do it right the first time? Or the Reason Rack plugin with the browser being confined to the window. It's just kind of a hassle. So yeah, like none of these things that I've just described are deal breakers in and of themselves, but they are little details that I think could be better. And if all of the little details were better, it would make the experience using Reason standalone especially so much better overall. So due to the nature of what I do for work, I often find myself making recommendations to people who are getting into music production for the first time. Often this involves them getting set up with an interface, a microphone, maybe some studio monitors, and that can be quite a lot of money up front. Understandably, a lot of them are hesitant to fork out big bucks for a DAW. So let's have a look at a couple of options. So Studio One Plus, if you get their hybrid option, $179 a year, and you get a perpetual license to Studio One. Ableton is very expensive, but the thing about Ableton is you can get a 50 or 60% off educational discount. And Ableton Live Lite is basically free. If you're buying an interface, depending on what you get, often Ableton Live Lite comes with it, or you can buy Ableton's mobile app and that comes with a free license for Live Lite, and that's $15 for the app. Another option is Waves Creative Access. This requires you to have a DAW to work in already. One of the cool things about the Wave's creative access is it includes Studioverse, which is very similar to the whole idea of the Reason Plus companion. Another option is Native Instruments Complete Start. This is just straight up free, and you actually get a lot of really cool things in here. The Ozone EQ is solid. Realm is one of my favorite reverb plugins ever, and if you wanted to plug in guitars particularly, Guitar Rig 7 is a very, very accessible way to get started in that world. Pair this with Ableton Live Lite, for example, and you basically have a lot of free stuff to get going with. If you have a Mac, Logic Pro is basically a no-brainer. It's, I think, $199 US. FL Studio is another great option that some people really like. One of the cool things that FL Studio does, it gives you lifetime free updates. Now, I love Reason, but $499 for Reason 13 is really expensive when you consider you are missing out on like so many of their best plugins. And if you do subscribe to Reason Plus, then it's like $200 a year. It's not bad compared to what some of the other options are, but when it comes to what is included in terms of like a functional DAW, I don't think the value proposition is really there. And for someone kind of getting into music for the first time, I think if you're subscribing to Reason Plus and you either have a preference for producing inside Reason Standalone or have another DAW of choice, then I think the value proposition for what you get with the Reason Rack plugin is justified. But for somebody starting out, I find it hard to recommend Reason. Now, they do have an education price similar to Ableton. But even though they've got this education price similar to Ableton, I still don't ever find myself recommending Reason. When I think of the needs of the individual in front of me and where they're at with their musical journey, I can never justify recommending Reason. Both from the point of view that I think it's hard to justify the price, given the feature set of the alternatives, and that I don't have confidence in Reason Studios to lay out a roadmap that I think presents an optimistic view of where Reason could be going in the future. And to be honest, that makes me a little bit sad because I love Reason. I think it's great. I still use Reason effects and stuff all of the time inside Ableton. Yeah, I just like Reason would be such a great piece of software to use to teach people how music production works because it's like you're actually using hardware. I think Reason could be such an incredible educational tool. And despite the fact that they have an educational discount, I just can't find myself recommending it. That brings us to the third part of this video: how I think Reason should change their business model in order to stay competitive. The rate at which Reason Studios has been improving Reason over the last few years really gives me no confidence that Reason is going to be able to catch up or compete with the other big DAWs. And so I'm left kind of viewing Reason Standalone the same way I view Machine, which is this, if you're not familiar with it. So Machine is primarily hardware first, but it's powered by a piece of software that you can either run standalone or as a plugin inside another DAW. While you can use Machine as a DAW, it isn't really designed for that. Machine is quite comfortable with what it is, and it feels like it's not trying to compete with the likes of Ableton, Logic, or Studio One. Machine is its own thing, but it's designed in such a way where it integrates very well with these other pieces of software. So Reason obviously is not hardware, but I think the Reason Rack is a unique product that nobody else really has and is awesome. But I think Reason Studios essentially gatekeeping Reason Standalone, pretending like it's a competitive product because they don't think it is, I think this is limiting what Reason could be. I think Reason could be an incredible education tool. It's software that I love, but for the reasons I mentioned earlier, like it's legitimately at the bottom of my list when it comes to making recommendations for people. Let me outline what I think Reason Studio should do to improve the product in a way that would ultimately make it the first thing that I would recommend to people at any stage in their music production journey. I would like to see Reason Studios offer Reason Standalone for free, with their entire business model switching to selling the Reason Rack. Now, they could have a free version of the rack, kind of like Complete Start. This might include a few basic plugins. And this would allow people to get the sense of what's going on with the Reason Rack. And then they could have a couple of paid tiers, like Waves Creative Access, maybe where they've got, like a bunch of their rack things and then all of the other ones as well. Kind of like what they've got with the 2 tiers anyway when you buy standalone versus subscribe to Reason Plus. They've already got the limitations, you'd just be switching it to either the cheaper version of the rack or the slightly more expensive version of the rack. So having the free version with the free rack with some introductory rack units would enable people to get the hang of what's going on, get familiar with Reason, and then when they want more stuff, subscribe to one of the 2 paid tiers of the Reason Rack. But it wouldn't stop there. If the person trying out Reason decided they wanted to switch to a more serious DAW for better workflow and functionality, they would be able to take the rack over to the next DAW as the Reason Rack plugin. For this to be the case though, I think there's 2 things that need to happen. Number 1, I think the Reason Rack plugin needs VST3 support so you can nest plugins inside the Reason Rack plugin inside your DAW. Machine has been able to do this for ages. It's one of the things that annoys me the most about the Reason Rack plugin because it means you can't take effects chains that you make in Reason Standalone that utilize VSTs and open those chains or combinators or whatever inside the Reason Rack plugin. Here's the second thing. I think Reason Studios should also make a Reason plugin, which would essentially be Reason Standalone as a plugin. This would allow you to play around with the Reason Rack in a standalone environment, but also utilizing players and blocks and the vocal pitch edit tool, and then open that entire session into a different DAW and have synced playback. This is what happens in Machine. This is how I use Machine pretty much exclusively. I'll start a session in Machine Standalone. Then what will happen most of the time is I will open that session in Machine inside Ableton and kind of continue to add things to it in Ableton. It's so easy. I take what I had in Machine, open it as a VST in Ableton, and then when I hit play on Ableton, it plays back Machine. So I think if Reason Studios went down this route, Reason could have the potential to be a staple tool in every producer's toolbox. They wouldn't be trying to play catch up with the other big DAWs, but they'd exist in a similar capacity to Machine. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Machine is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but Machine knows what it is and what it isn't. And I feel like Reason Studios is kind of confused about this. I get the sense that Reason Studios wants the Reason Rack to be the main thing. They're trying to push people to subscribe to Reason Plus. And I think the Reason Rack should be the main thing. It's an amazing product and is Reason's point of difference. But I feel like Reason Studios is trying to hang on to the idea of Reason Standalone as a serious DAW. And I think they need to rethink this. I don't think Reason Standalone has the potential to be a serious DAW. If you look at the feature sets that are getting added with every update to the likes of Ableton or Logic or Studio One, I don't think there's any conceivable way based on how Reason Studios have been adding stuff over the last 3 updates or so. They're just gonna get further and further behind what the other guys are doing. So I think Reason Standalone has to be viewed as secondary to the rack. I think if they looked at how they could make Reason Standalone a plugin in a similar way that Machine is, then it could have an amazing future as a standalone sequencer and beat maker that can be opened in your DAW as a plugin. I think there are some really, really great things about Reason Standalone, but none of those things are enough for me to use it in its current state when I have alternatives. If I could open Reason Standalone inside Ableton as a plugin, I think I would see myself using Reason Standalone a lot more. So this would result in Reason Studios having 2 plugins. The Reason Rack plugin, which would just be the rack, and I think still has a point of existing because it would definitely be lighter on DSP. But then they could have a Reason plugin for when you want those additional sequencing and arrangement features. Or like their vocal pitch edit tool, Melodyne style thing. That's one of the awesome things about Reason. Imagine having that as a plugin. You could do all of your vocal recording inside Reason standalone, do your pitch kind of stuff, and then just open that entire session inside your DAW and have all of your vocals there ready to go. That would be amazing. This has been my first impressions of Reason 13. I love it. I think it's a great update. I think it's the best update they've done in a very long time. I continue to find myself with this problem where I always want to recommend Reason. I never find myself able to. But I think if they kind of switched up their business model, that would make it far easier to recommend. I would start using Reason the heck of a lot more. I'd probably start designing all of my guitar effects chains in Reason because I could make combinators for my guitar effects chains. I really want to use the Ripley space delay as my primary delay, but at the moment I can't do that inside Reason because I work in Ableton. I would use Reason a whole lot more if I could open it as a plugin inside a DAW. And I think I'd be able to recommend it as a tool for people to get started with if they had an accessible free option and then just focused on having paid tiers for their like premium rack effects. If you've stuck with the video for this long, thanks for sticking around. I'm gonna try and make some more. You may have noticed I've kind of switched up my studio a little bit and now I feel like I'm far more effectively set up to actually make videos again. To sum everything up, I think the Reason 13 update is amazing. I still can't recommend it to people, and I think Reason Studios should change their business model. I'll see you guys next time.